educational forum. It is not the Jerry Springer Show, just so you know. The reason that we're all here is because we love Mammoth, and we're very passionate about what happens here and for the future of this beautiful place that we call home. We only have 2 hours to cover a lot of ground. So we will not have any time for any lengthy, passionate speeches, just so you know. We have folks on both sides of the measure to give you some factual information to clear any misconceptions and questions that you may have when you go to vote on October 6th. So we're going to have Matthew Lehman and Ted Carlton. Hopefully Ted's here. They're going to be here to moderate, and they're going to keep the meeting on track. So first on the agenda, we have Sandra Moberly from the town of Mammoth Lakes, and she's going to discuss the quality of life ordinance. Thanks for coming again, and let me know how it went, because I'm leaving. No, just kidding. Sandra, it's all you.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to provide the group with a brief summary of the quality of life ordinance that was adopted by Town Council last night. The purpose of this ordinance is to provide operational standards for transient rentals. The Town Council directed staff to prepare this ordinance in response to complaints that we've received regarding transient rentals and their impacts on adjacent properties due to issues with noise, trash, parking, and safety. This ordinance applies to all transient rentals within residential structures like condominiums, townhomes, single-family homes, and a majority of these standards are already required by a variety of different codes like the California Public Health and Safety Code, Noise Ordinance, Solid Waste Ordinance, etc. But this ordinance consolidates the operational requirements for transient rentals into one ordinance.
Sandra, can I interrupt you just for a second?
Go ahead.
You guys, if you could keep it down a little bit, what she's addressing is an ordinance that's actually going to have an effect on a lot of the questions and the measure that's before us. So a lot of questions you may have later are probably going to be addressed here. So if I could just get you guys to listen up.
Thank you. So some new standards that were included for transient rentals were the requirements for interior and exterior signage for transient rentals. We require now an inspection prior to the issuance of a transient occupancy certificate. We have occupancy limitations and increased fines for violations of the requirements. This ordinance doesn't change the way that we deal with quality of life issues that are not associated with transient rentals. We still enforce the noise ordinance, the solid waste ordinance, and other applicable requirements, but this ordinance requires additional operational standards for transient rentals. As part of the process, we did present this draft ordinance and we took comments from the Planning and Economic Development Commission, the TOT Committee, our Lodging Association, and we also had a workshop with the Town Council and 3 public meetings on the ordinance. The ordinance will go into effect on October 16th, as it was approved last night by the Council. If you would like to review the ordinance, it's on the main page of the town's website. So if you just go straight to the town's website, it's right on the main page there. You can click on it, review a summary of the ordinance, and then the ordinance itself. And my contact information is also right there on the main page of the website, and you can feel free to contact me if you have any questions on it. So that was my summary of it.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. We appreciate it. And we appreciate all you folks for coming out tonight. There's a question that we're all trying to answer and try to find an answer to. I think this has been going on for a couple months, even a couple years. To Z or not to Z? That is our question. And there is going to be a general format Ted and I are going to try to follow, but we are going to allow some flexibility in it. We'll be asking questions. Obviously, the panelists, we're going to ask a question of each a proponent and an opponent to the measure. And we're going to ask the panelists to address the moderators versus getting into a conflict with one another. I understand it's a pretty heated item, so we're going to try to set it to around two minutes. We won't be overly strict with it. If somebody has a good point and they're sticking to it, we'll let it go. And we want to get as much information to the audience as possible just through intelligent questions, and we appreciate if we don't get off on any rants or long diatribes of any sort. I know it's easy to do that because people are pretty passionate about it. So Ted and I may have some follow-up questions. And with that, what I'd like to do is just ask each of the panelists. I'll start with Mr. Paul Rudder and work our way over to Sandy and see if they can just give us about a minute and give us a little bit of background about themselves and their involvement in Mammoth. So Paul, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Well, thank you, Matt. My name is Paul Rudder. I've been in Mammoth since 1981. I came to the Eastern Sierra from a town called Marysville in the Central Valley after I graduated from law school. I came here to, I came to Bishop in '75 to work for Indian Legal Services, and did for several years. Then went into private practice with a guy named Ed Forstenser, who was my law school roommate. We practiced together for several years until Ed went up on the bench, and I continued to practice until 2007 when I finally retired from that. Along the way, this
isn't a life story. This is just like a brief 1-minute introduction. Paul is a mall owner in town. David.
There'll be no kibitzing from the moderators, thank you. And you're not as good looking as Megyn Kelly, so just...
I understand.
Stop editing. Anyway, so I got involved in real estate at the same time and have been involved in it since about 1982 or so. I was on the board of the Water District for many years, have been involved in various charitable activities around town, and have been in business here for a long time. And Mammoth is my home. I don't have any desire to be anywhere else. This is the best place on earth, even if from time to time we have little disagreements. And so we're happy to be here tonight to see if we can bring some light to all the heat that's been generated over this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. I'm David Page. I'm a freelance journalist, so I'm one of those that mostly works from home, and I travel a lot. My wife is a realtor. We moved here, I think it's 9 years ago, but it may be 10. I lose track. Moved up from Los Angeles. I'm from Colorado. My wife's from New York. We have 2 kids here now in elementary school, one in 2nd grade and one in 5th grade. And I'm a co-founder of Mammoth Medical Missions, been working on that for quite a few years, and I'm a board member of Mammoth Lakes Recreation, and I'm a homeowner.
Okay. Thank you. Kathy?
I'm Kathy Cage, resident since '88, husband Tom, who has Kittredge Sports, P3, Hertz, Chevron with some partners and all those. I have 2 daughters, one just graduated college, one just graduated high school. I own a small engineering consulting business, and former town council member, mayor, all those things hats you get to wear when you're on council, 94 to I think 2002.
My name is Sandy Hogan, and like a lot of people in this audience, young and old, I took a year off to be a ski bum. That was 45 years ago, and I went to the mountains, South Lake Tahoe, and then, just like a lot of people, you work 2, 3, 4 jobs, you figure out how to make a living, and you fall in love with the mountains, and you never leave. And I figure I ended up here in the best place, but along the way, I, believe it or not, was a partner in a bar. I was the only one on the liquor license because women in those days could not tend bar unless they were on it. And I was in real estate for a couple of years as well. For most of the years, well, starting in '70, I was a professional ski patroller at Heavenly Valley. And you always have to try to figure, what to do in the summertime. And along the way, I was lucky enough to get in at the bottom with the Forest Service, fighting fires and law enforcement. And I ended up going back to school to become a forester. I was able to have a career with the Forest Service, which was fabulous. Ended up coming here as the district ranger after being a district ranger elsewhere. And when I retired, rather than going home to Tahoe where my family was, Mammoth was the place. I love the mountain, I love the resort. I've lived in resort communities my whole life, my whole adult life, and love it. And, since then, in retirement, I've been able to serve on a number of boards and commissions, and on the grand jury, and teach ESL, and a bunch of stuff like that. The things that you do in a mountain town and a resort town, and you get to know a lot of people, and I'm very proud of this community. I love it. And I think we all do, or we wouldn't be here this long. I didn't realize we were up here. I actually went to the mountains first. Surprise, I thought you guys were all old.
Thank you. Thank you. Kathy, first question. The Yes folks present this as a very simple measure. If you could just please explain in your words what Yes on Z does.
Okay, it does two things. The first thing is that it affirms the current zoning with respect to nightly rentals in houses. So it's about one thing, it's about zoning, and it's about one very specific aspect of zoning, and it's only in the zones that you see on that yellow map up there. I don't know if anyone got the pictures out there, but they have designations. So that's the first thing it does. It affirms the current zoning, which prohibits nightly rentals in houses. The second thing it does, it says that if that is to change, if that prohibition is to change, it can only change by a vote of the people.
So Kathy, a lot of the sitting council members are a little irritated that the voter referendum has taken decision-making power out of their hands. And you as a former council member, I was wondering, would a voter referendum like this piss you off if you were sitting there as mayor these days?
No, actually it wouldn't. About this time last year, I actually went to the town council.
What if you disagreed with the measure, the voter referendum measure? Would it piss you off then?
I don't know, probably not. I'm kind of not that easily pissed off.
Okay. So on the no side,
There you
is Kathy's explanation fairly accurate, or would you find some differences with it?
I'm sorry, are you going to direct that to one or the other?
I figure one of you will figure it out.
We're going to get an opening statement.
Okay, well, we're not. Well, basically, what Kathy says, hi, thank you. What Kathy says is exactly what what Measure Z would do. It would basically freeze our present zoning in concrete. And when I say that, what I mean is to change the zoning, first you'd have to have an affirmative vote of the town council, and then it would have to be subjected to a vote of the public, which sounds relatively simple and straightforward. This vote that Measure Z is going to create will cost $50,000. $50,000 is more money than the town has right now. The town is on very difficult economic times. It can't pay $50,000 without taking it from somewhere else. I believe that this summer it was some children's recreation and other things, although I'm not saying that as an absolute fact because I'm 100% sure, but it came from somewhere. Future votes will cost anywhere from $7,000 to $20,000, depending on how soon we want to have them. There's a regular election every couple of years, and if we do it during the regular election, it's a $7,000 deal, apparently, as I understand it. And if it's not during a regular election, it's $20,000. The problem is that if you can't make changes without having a couple of years go by, or you have to pay up to $20,000 to make a change, our town can't afford it. And the result is that the town council will shy away from making any changes, even if they're very, very necessary. So that we'll basically be going back to the future. We'll be stuck. We won't be able to make changes easily, even if conditions warrant it. So that's why I think that Measure Z creates a huge mechanical problem for the town in being able to administer the laws the way they should. We have a representative form of government for a reason. A couple hundred years ago when they formed this country and towns were 20 people, everybody could come and get together and vote. But when towns grew to be slightly larger, like say 100 people, quickly that procedure got out of hand and we changed to a representative form of government. We did so because it was proved beyond a reasonable doubt that having a vote of the public on particular issues just wasn't functional. You couldn't operate a town that way. To think that we're going back to a form of government that was popular 200 years ago and has proved over this last 200 years not to work it's remarkable. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. Sandy, question for you. As I'm looking at this measure, I see, I'm not really quite sure if we had single-family home rentals that were expanded, it would appear that home values in those areas would rise because people would have the opportunity to rent their homes and create added value. At the same time, the neighborhoods that prevented rentals would seem to go up in value because people would have those sanctuaries where they could buy and know that they weren't going to have rentals next to them. So it seems like a win-win. Why are you so against nightly home rentals?
I'm not. We have lots of them here. As a matter of fact, that's what people don't seem to realize. This community is probably so advanced compared to the others in having excellent zoning that provides for the quiet, peaceful enjoyment in the residential, the RSF, and the RMF2. That's where families live and work, and people like me used to work and now live and enjoy it. And we have the resort zone and other zoning that allows for an awful lot of homes. And that, if we want to talk about inventory, I'll follow up on that later with another question. I personally did the inventory, and we will give you a copy of that tonight, so you can take it and go check it if you like, just like I did. But as a matter of fact, we have over 180 legally zoned homes, if you want to call them, everything from cabins all the way up to trophy homes, that are legal to rent. Those folks can go get their business permit, and a lot of them
Just because those homes are legal to rent, those owners may not want to rent them, correct?
It's up to them. We're not saying it's
So in other
available.
words,
We're just
like,
saying they're legal.
you're talking about an inventory which may or may not be available. I have a follow-up for you.
Sure.
Which is, a person probably coming up through the ranks, as you did over the years, could never afford to buy your house now, right? Your generation is a stitch in time. I don't think younger people who are coming up through the Forest Service would ever be able to retire the way you've retired. So I guess the question is, do you resent those younger people who may want to be able to rent their homes a couple times a year to be able to come up with the extra money to be able to afford to live here?
Not at all. It wasn't easy for me to buy my first or second one, whatever. This one here is not my 1,200 square foot little gambrel, which Matthew has appraised. It's not exactly, fancy, but the fact is there are ways to do it. I bought my first one in partnership with somebody else, and we sold it, and we turned around, and we each were able to get our own. But it's not easy. You're right. And what worries me is the fact is that if we start allowing, in other words, your transient rentals everywhere, yes, that does drive up the price because speculators come right in. And that's happening right now in South Lake Tahoe, and I can give you plenty of information on it.
Is there any way I could address the issue of inventory, or do we want to wait on that?
Fire away.
So I'm looking at this town of Mammoth Lakes fact sheet, single-family transient rentals, which I think you participated in. And there are indeed 180 properties that are zoned legal for nightly rental, of which 103 of them are vacant parcels. There are 43 single-family homes, and of those, there are 9 that are licensed for single-family rentals. Now, compare this to really pretty much any resort that we compete with. Jackson Hole, which has a fairly broad prohibition on single-family rentals, does have 250 units available that are licensed, that are standalone homes. And then you go up from there to, say, Steamboat Springs has 696, which is about 7% of their housing stock. Ours is 0.03% of our housing stock. Breckenridge, at the top of the chart, has 41% of its housing stock available. So when we say that there are 180 homes available to rent, it's not really entirely true, I think. I think what we have is 9 that are available.
I think you skipped a few on this sheet. You skipped the cabins that are available year-round. Those are the ski in, ski out, and they must be rented by the terms of their permit. There is no residency allowed, so they're available year-round. So add another 55 or 56 to what you're saying. And the fact is, Sandra and I've worked together all along with this inventory and checked my figures with Sandra. And just so that you understand how we do that, Sandra counts hers once the occupancy permit is given. I counted when they start building because I don't have any way to go out and know when they've gotten an occupancy permit. but basically, that's a 17 difference. Now, the fact is that we do have a lot of rentals. We didn't count any
But how
townhomes.
many licensed single-family rentals do we have?
But you see, I'm not a licenser. That's the towns, and I can tell you right now.
Again, Sandy, your neighborhood prohibits nightly rentals with your CC&Rs. Why are you so interested in regulating the rest of town?
The CC&Rs are a civil protection. They're not a legal protection, a criminal. In other words, an ordinance is a law. So in other words, if the ordinance were to go away in all of the districts, in all of the subdivisions where the families live, there would be no protection, especially for ones that don't have CC&Rs. But in mine, it's the same with all of them. You have to file a lawsuit against your neighbor, or if you have an HOA, our HOA is a social club, it's $10 a year.
Sandy,
So, I mean,
if I could interrupt for a moment,
Yeah,
I'd like
yeah,
to
yeah.
ask our town manager a question. Maybe he can answer. And the reason we have the town manager and Sandra here tonight is really to kind of help identify some potential discrepancies. The question I have is, if there were nightly rentals permitted, let's say in a neighborhood with CC&Rs, wouldn't CC&Rs trump the nightly rental? And the reason I asked the question, I recall our town attorney had addressed this once before, and I thought that he had said that the CC&Rs would actually take precedent over a town ordinance.
The discussions we've had on that, that's correct. The intent, if you did anything, that the CC&Rs, if they're prohibiting nightly rentals, would be preemptive over the town zoning ordinance change, and if it was truly applied on the town-wide basis like that, I don't, so.
Can I get a chance to
CC&Rs
weigh in on
would-
this a bit?
Okay.
Depending how they're written and.
Sure, Kat,
set up.
Yeah.
if you would, I'm going to
Okay.
go to another question here when you're
Okay,
done.
so just while we keep the train going. So I want to tie back into what Sandra talked about, our quality of life ordinance that just got, it's a little bit of a misnomer to call it a quality of life ordinance. What it really is the standards for licensing a transient rental. That's really what it is. So what's new about it is we never had standards for houses before. And so this kind of adds houses into it. And, then it applies to other things. So based on that, so first of all, please note that that only applies on the pink map. It doesn't apply in the yellow map. The yellow map is the residential ones. That's what's under question for Measure Z. The pink map is a map of all the zones in town where it's legal to rent right now. So the new quality of life ordinance only applies to the pink map. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, based on this fact sheet that you have and the inventory you have, by my count, we have 219 of those who are eligible to rent, and then who, if they choose to rent, then would have to do all the things like the sign on the outside and all that. But that number's 219 based on the fact sheet of what applies in terms of who would have to license. So I'm just pulling the town numbers and just adding up all the categories that apply. So as of last night, we have 219 new units who are legal and eligible to rent.
Okay.
Is that fair to say?
I'm going to go ahead, if we
Check
can.
my
I want to
math,
move
but-
on to a new question. We've taken about 15 minutes for one question. My question is that if Measure Z suggests a lack of town council trust, if we don't trust our town council, which was elected by a vote of the people, why should we trust a vote of the people in this situation?
Okay, can I take that one? Because I'm the one, I would say I'm probably the reason we have this initiative.
Sure.
I came to Sandy's group, the Mammoth Neighborhoods Group, last fall. After trying to forward a couple of ideas to the council, they didn't bite on. One is, would you do an advisory referendum? No. How about if we do a thing where we check with property owners, have property owners vote? No. So my sense of it was they were going over a line that I wasn't okay with. It wasn't about trust. They were forthright. They were pretty much like, we're going to go down this process. Your council and others had started it. I'd been watching it for a long time, and for me, I could see that this council was going to complete that process. And so, for me, I went to the folks that I knew, that shared my view of, I'm not interested in considering something that, changes those zoning limitations on the yellow map. I'm actually not interested in that. But I don't know if I'm in the majority or not. I don't know. I'd love the world to be the world according to Kathy Cage. I think it'd be awesome.
So is
But
there-
I know it's not. But so that's why you go out and you gather signatures to see if enough other people agree that it should be on the ballot, and when we talk about it like we do now. So So it's not about trust of town council. It's just that I differed with where they were going, and I wanted to see if other people did too. And to me, that's what the signatures and the ballot measure are about. And we'll find out once we vote. I don't know. I think those are great guys. It's a horrible job. Who wants, half the time we have to twist people's arm to do it, and I'm glad they do. But it's about one very specific measure. It's not about like the world according, it's not about like government as we know it. It's not changing that. It's just one narrow area.
Well, I have a couple follow-ups, and I'd like to ask you guys the same questions.
Thank you, Matt. I'll take that one if I may. Kathy says it's not about the trust of the town council. I'm having trouble with that remark or that view because, in fact, the town council did not cross a line. It didn't do anything. Kathy said she was concerned about where they were going. Well, up to now, up until this quality of life initiative, which I haven't heard any Measure Z people are opposed to, up until then, the council had not done anything, hadn't taken any position. And before the council takes a position, it has public hearings, it gets input from the planning department, it gets input from the planning commission. There's a whole involved process before any town council has a vote and takes a position. What's happened is the council said, we're going to consider this. And the people who sponsored, I guess Kathy, who sponsored Measure Z said, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't consider it. You should just leave everything alone. And the council said, well, that's not the way to have government. That's not what the council is for. And so they continue to consider it. And the result was that now we have Measure Z, which is an effort to undercut the council and take the council completely out of it as far as Measure Z is concerned. I think that's inappropriate. I think that's inappropriate because the way the system is supposed to work, and I'm not opposed to initiatives. I'm not opposed to people having a right to vote. This is America. Everybody should have the right to vote. But the way it was supposed to work is if the council were to do something that a significant portion of the community found unsupportable, then you would move to an initiative to get the vote that Kathy's talking about. In this case, the council hasn't done a thing. But what we're doing right now is spending $50,000 to find out how the public feels before the council's had a crack at it. If we do that on every issue, Mammoth will really be out of business.
Well, Paul, I'll move to a related question then.
Well, Matt, let me just one more thing. I believe that in truth, what you said was correct. There is a measure of distrust for the council. And I don't think that's unfair. Councils in the past have put us in a $43 million hole. There are good reasons to distrust the council, and I don't blame anybody for feeling that way. The problem is, if we say, well, we distrust the council, and we're not going to let them do things, what we're saying is we're just going to, pour concrete over our governing mechanisms in this town because we're afraid. We're going to govern out of fear.
Well, let me
distrust
cut you off, Paul.
While distrust is not unreasonable,
Paul,
to operate out of fear is.
Paul, I'd like to tie into this, please, and I'd like to say, okay, so there seems to be a little bit of distrust, at least on this issue. Yet this measure seems like it's going to tie the hands of future councils. So aren't we making a decision now for all the councils moving into the future?
Yes, that's the point. It is.
It seems very transparent that that's the point, and I get it.
Yeah.
That the idea is to lock zoning exactly as it was written in 1984, and I think there are several problems with that. One is that the world has changed, that other resorts, and if you read, we've got this study of Colorado ski resorts, which is a 52-page document that has a lot of best practices. A lot of other ski resorts across the country and cities have been dealing with this issue for a while, and some of them started 6-10 years ago to come up with ways to mitigate the impacts. And I think that it's the problem with Measure Z is that it doesn't it doesn't address the problems that we're talking about. If you've got a problem renter, and we've all had experiences with that, or a lot of us have, and we have friends who have experiences with that, Measure Z doesn't do anything to address that problem. If this passes and you wake up on October 7th and into the foreseeable future, there will be no opportunity to pass any kind of legislation that allows for a program of enforcing illegal rentals, or very importantly, because you can say I'm against climate change, but if you can't just prohibit it. I mean, that's one of the things in this study that all towns have found, is that if you just ban something, if you prohibit it across the board, it just proliferates. And this is what we have right now. We have a status quo where we've basically got whack-a-mole going on, where we have illegal rentals popping up everywhere, and we don't have a mechanism, A, to enforce it, and B, to provide a road to compliance for our visitors who want to have a place to rent. And it's been, this is a multi-billion-dollar business across the world. People want to rent houses. And so if we don't provide them houses, and I think that, honestly, if we really had 180 to 200 houses that were licensed and available, I think that's a good number. That's somewhere near 10% of our housing stock. As it is right now, we're not anywhere near that. So the question is, how do we come to the table and encourage our council and our planning commission and our staff to come up with a program so that we can provide that product within the zones where we want it and keep it out of the zones where we don't?
Thank you, David.
Hey, Kathy.
Is it my turn?
Nice, Kathy.
Is it my turn to follow up on this, I believe?
Yeah, they keep putting stuff out, and we got,
All right, go
I
ahead.
guess, right.
I got lots of notes here.
Right. As far as the CAST report, we've all read that CAST report, and the fact is, it points out all of the problems that have happened and that communities are trying to rein it in. The one thing about Measure Z that you don't seem to understand is it's not preventing the council from doing anything. I look at it, it's a pause so that when we have a decision, it is a thoughtful decision. What scared, I think, most of us is we've seen the history of this. It was an issue in 2006 when Joe was running. It was an issue in 2008 when she was actually elected. It was an issue in 2009, and that council wisely said, after spending a lot of time, said, you know what? If neighborhoods or parts of neighborhoods want to do this, have them come to us, and we will deal with it at that point with a proposal. Guess what? Nobody came. 2012, the first line of Andy Morris's memo, and Sandra had to do a real long program of work, said the town council is considering opening the single-family transit rental in town-wide. And that's what pushed the hot button, because people that had been here for so long had seen this over and over and over. The town council, and we tried to talk about this, do our inventory and all like that. But then it was very clear, once Michael came in and was appointed, and we know that Rick Wood also wanted it, they started pushing it again. And that's exactly why our group got active, including in the election. And it's no secret that this council is looking at opening it up. We're saying, you know what? Give us a good plan. That's all this does. It does not lock it up. It puts a pause.
Okay,
and so
thank
it'll be
you.
a good plan.
Kathy,
We're going between Ted and I'm ready to jump before you.
Kathy,
I have some things to say here.
what I want to, obviously one of the elephants in the room is that, we, as a town, we are a one-trick pony that relies heavily on tourism and TOT. And we have crumbling infrastructure. I just sat through a very fascinating stormwater drainage plan presentation last night at council, where we realized we have $20 million to make in improvements or some such number in the next however many years. And so we have all this crumbling infrastructure.
I think we should take that to
These
the next
guys are coming up with some sort of idea to say, hey, let's augment our TOT. Let's try to capture more TOT. Let's try to broaden the housing base. How are you going to pay for all these things if you lock it all up?
Okay, so I would disagree with your characterization of locking it all up, but
Didn't you use that phrase earlier?
no, that wasn't me.
All right, someone else.
Somebody
All
did
right.
it. So, okay, so your fundamental question is, how do you think we're going to pay for things? Look, our tax base is what it is. Everyone's in, not everyone, lots of people are in fairly dire straits because we're at the end of 4 years of drought. Okay, so the revenue base is low based on that. But from my standpoint, The downsides of that particular proposal for new revenue are not worth the potential upsides. And really, that's what a council member does. They say, okay, here's an opportunity, here's the potential, and so I'm looking at that same thing going, yeah, I see that there is a hope. There's no guarantee, there's a hope, but for me, the downsides of that particular proposal are not worth it. It's not worth it. And here's the reason. Back to that economy and back to what we're about, we're tourism base. As I mentioned earlier, my husband and I were small business people. He needs to have staff that he can deploy at a reasonable rate. If we do this kind of thing with opening up all these residential neighborhoods to any, now look, I'll say all these neighborhoods, but even on a limited basis, if you start to really degrade your residential neighborhoods, the pattern is clear. It's well documented, not just in the CAST report, but the 2011 National Realtors report. This thing is well documented that you lose residential housing of all kinds. It's just a market thing. If you have less houses to rent on a 30-day basis, you shrink your supply and your prices go up. It's well documented. This isn't theoretical anymore. And so for me, I get that we have these problems with the finances, but this particular proposal is unacceptable. And so anyway, but can I have a chance, since I have the mic and I haven't had it for a while, to address a couple other things people said that didn't get to...
Paul was going to say something, so you can come back to it.
Okay, so next time I'm going to jump in then when I have some stuff to say.
All right,
Great.
go ahead.
What I want to say, Ted, is this. There have been some ideas that have just been put out there by both Sandy and Kathy that I think just are simply not in touch with reality. The first one is the town council, and Sandy was referring to previous town councils, and now she's referring to this town council. The town council is going to open it up to nightly rentals. All neighborhoods, any available houses, they'll be open to nightly rentals. That simply is not on the table and isn't true. The council has talked about having nightly rentals not in neighborhoods where there are CC&Rs. Kathy's neighborhood and Sandy's neighborhood have CC&Rs, so they would get no nightly rentals under any scenario. There are neighborhoods in town that don't have CC&Rs that might be eligible for it, but the town council has said very clearly, we're talking about pilot programs where we have a few nightly rentals and we see how it works. We see what the problems are. All of this business about well-documented reducing the housing stock doesn't apply when you only have very few homes involved. It's all about numbers. If it's true that the council was going to open things up and allow any homes in Mammoth that wanted to rent, that would be a real disaster, and I'd be in favor of Measure Z. But we haven't gone there one bit. We've had rumor, we've had innuendo, the council is going to do this, the council is going to do that.
So Paul, question. On the no side, how come if the council might be interested in introducing a pilot program, for example, how come that hasn't been rolled out by now for the voters to take a look at and say, like, hey, if I vote no, this is what I'm going to get? How come it's been so vague?
Okay, that's a fair question, Ted. In point of fact, previous town councils, the same town councils that brought us the $43 million deficit that we have now, talked about this and then kicked the can down the road. They never actually did anything. This present town council has started on a program of dealing with this issue. They may not have dealt with it as fast enough for the Measure Z people or some other people in town, I don't know, but they've started to move on the thing. They recognize it's a very difficult issue. They weren't going to pass something overnight, but they were working at passing an ordinance, a procedure that would be proper for Mammoth. It would be small to begin with. They'd see all the problems you're talking about, and they'd work it out so it made sense with input from people who are against nightly rentals, people who are for it. But the bottom line is, not a single council person has said, I want nightly rentals in the knolls. I want nightly rentals in the trails. That has never happened, and it's not gonna.
So
Okay,
Ted,
we
Ted,
get
my
it.
question-
Okay,
my-
back to
my-
Kathy, go.
My question to Paul is, I get what you're saying. I understand it's an idea in progress. They don't have a specific plan. Why are they afraid to put that to a vote of the people? Why? I don't know why. If it's such a great program, why wouldn't we support it? And if we don't, wouldn't they learn something about what's not good about that program? That's all we're saying. There's no prohibition from the council proposing the exact kind of program that you're like characterizing there. We don't have it yet. They haven't done it yet. But getting back to your other issue, like why didn't we wait to see what they had and then react? Because the time frames are bad. We'd only have 30 days to react. We looked into this a lot, and we just couldn't visualize ourselves putting together a response within 30 days. And so this way, what happens is the council has to ask us, the citizens, the community, instead of us asking them, scratching at the screen, hey, listen to me. So those of us who have been in the process, so when David talks about coming to the table and being there, oh, for God's sake, that's outrageous. Who has been at the table? I can go to the minutes. I don't see your names at those meetings. All our names are at the meetings.
Actually,
We've been at the table. Well, I'm sorry, that's an exaggeration. I'm sorry.
David?
Because I haven't looked at all of them.
Let
so I'm sure
David
you have.
respond.
I
Let
know,
David
but-
respond. Go ahead.
So,
No, actually, and back to your question about why we don't have a program already. 3 years ago, the council put it on the agenda and started to entertain the idea of having a discussion. And I was asked to join a table of people who were all lodging association representatives and on an enforcement committee that was volunteer. And I thank them for starting that effort. But at the same time, we've needed to transition to where we have professional, paid, neutral staff doing our enforcement. And that's, I think, a great step. But sitting at that table, I was the only voice for, hey, can we look at this and look at our zoning, and is it really the best zoning possible? And I was basically thrown out of the room. I mean, there was an atmosphere of, if anybody even mentions the notion of single-family rentals, then you are a bad guy and you're against this town. And I think that's what cowed previous councils and this council too. Every time they've tried to talk about it, there's been a litany of, you guys are trying to ruin our town. And I don't think anybody really wants to do that. And I think one of the things that hasn't had a chance to come up is that if we all know this town. And the fact is we do have great residential neighborhoods like the Trails, like the Knolls, like Old Mammoth. The ghetto is a great, vibrant place where people live, the so-called ghetto. There are neighborhoods like where I live where there are 5 of us who are local, and there are 30 houses around us that are vacant 80% of the year. There's a condo development 5 houses down from me that has 25 or 30 units. There's one up the street from me that has 54 units. The house across from me is owned by 3 different families. I have no idea who's over there at any given time. There are 2 houses down the street across from this condo development that are probably illegal rentals. The cars come and go, who knows? The house behind us is leased on an annual basis to the Santa Barbara Ski Club. So every weekend it's somebody completely different. So I'm completely impacted by living in a resort community, and that's what I chose. I wanted to live in a resort community. And I feel personally, and I can't speak for the council, but I feel that in my neighborhood alone, and when I look at this zoning map, like if you look up Lakeview, on one side, it's transient rentals. On the other side of the street, it's residential homes. And my feeling is that in those areas that are already impacted by what a resort community is, we should be able to engage the idea of having a small pilot program that says, hey, let's offer this product that our community wants. Let's channel this activity that's happening all over town into a place where it's appropriate, so that we can then turn and control it in the places where it's not appropriate.
okay, that segues.
Okay, can we move on to a new question here, if we may? There have been arguments made that this initiative has come about into existence through promotion of fear, even misleading information. Can you offer some thoughts on the following bullet points that are outlined on the Vote Yes postcard? 1, a yes vote promotes my right to vote, protects my right to vote. Does it?
Yes, it does, because it means, to me, it means that if a thoughtful proposal comes forward, whether it comes forward from David and his neighbors, or from Paul and his neighbors, or from the council, or whatever, it does protect my right to look at it, and if it's good for the community, for the long term of the community, then why wouldn't I vote for it? But what worries me is I've been here long enough to see a lot of these silver bullet solutions. And I can tell you the airport was one of them. And if for those of you that don't remember, that was a 4-1 vote. And guess who was the one against it? Kathy. you know? I mean, but they didn't listen, okay? And the same type of thing is happening right now. We would love to have a community conversation. I have not seen a community conversation even on that dais. The four guys talk to each other, and the person that has the history and the knowledge, if they would even ask, we would all learn. They don't even ask her. The senior council member who's been there around it, tell them the most and tell them why. There are a lot of good reasons. And Paul, is an attorney, for you to propose a pilot program giving people a bundle of rights that you can't take away.
The question was, does it protect your right to vote?
Okay.
Can
All
I
right,
speak to that?
Anyway.
Yeah, if you would, I guess I would like to add in there, I mean, is my right to vote threatened? So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that. I don't think our right to vote was ever threatened. I think we all voted last June. We had 8 very good candidates. We chose 3 of them, right? Or 4? 3. Good people. We know them. I trust them. I don't want to do their work. I don't want to go through storm drain mitigation procedures. I want them to do that. I want them to do the hard work of zoning. And I feel like what this in fact does is squander our right to vote, because it feels to me frivolous and costly. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. And furthermore, to your point, Sandy, I think if this were to pass, I think it would, because of the way it's been framed in the Vaughn's parking lot and the way most people are looking at this, or a lot of people are, it's framed as, are you for or against single-family rentals? And I think that's a real mischaracterization of the way that it's written. And I'm very much against nightly rentals that are unregulated, and I'm very much against nightly rentals in certain neighborhoods. But what this does, if this were to pass, it would send, I think, a very clear message to a council that's already strapped financially that this is not an issue that they are going to be able to handle. So we're never going to get, at least for the next council and in the foreseeable future, we're never going to get any kind of real program to deal with the problems that we're facing.
Hey, Matthew, he just said something inaccurate, actually. I got to just call you on
Good,
that.
good.
So,
Okay, I was just going to say, one silver bullet solution to solve another silver bullet problem is not my idea. I like thoughtful decisions, and I don't know what the voters are, I don't know what the council's afraid of. These are the people that elected them. And so hopefully we're thoughtful, but the fact is we've been around long enough to see that there have been a lot of bad ideas that people jump on, and they think, oh man, we're going to get rich, this and that, whatever, you know? I mean, it's very sad to me.
Well, I'm going to move on to the next question.
Correct the inaccuracy. So he said this measure doesn't do anything. Remember the question we asked at the beginning? Hey, what does Measure Z do? It does 2 things. It's the second thing I talked about, that is that protecting the right to vote. That's what that's about.
Well,
So it does
I'll
do
ask for
something.
a 1 minute
If I can
recess.
respond to that, Matt.
I'm going to interject and
It doesn't
say,
solve all the problems.
Stop.
I'm going to
So, there.
have two other quick questions with a 1 minute response, if you would. The other bullet point says, a no vote means council can impose nightly rentals in any neighborhood. Is that accurate?
In any of the residential neighborhoods, that's correct. They can impose it. There are actually some of the resort zoned right now that it's prevented by master plan. They could go and, work with those in any case, and Greyhawk is a good example. Greyhawk is zoned resort. It's a beautiful ski in, ski out area.
But the question was,
They can
does a no
impose it
vote mean
there
that council can impose nightly rentals in any neighborhood?
Can I respond to that, Matt?
without a
Yes.
vote of the people.
Thank you. The fact of the matter is, when you have CC&Rs, the council can pass all their ordinances at once. That doesn't make CC&Rs go away. CC&Rs are an expression of a neighborhood that trump town ordinances. I know because I litigated such a case when some out-of-town people put a group home in a neighborhood that CC&Rs prevented it. I was hired by the neighborhood. We took the CC&Rs to court. The CC&Rs prevailed, and the group home was put out of business.
how
So
much did it
the
cost,
fact that the
Paul?
council can do something to make CC&Rs go away just isn't true.
No,
Okay,
the
I have one
ordinance
last
protects it.
question. If I get a 1 minute response from both sides. A yes vote ensures the voters control the issues of nightly rentals. And to follow that up, does it, or will nightly rentals continue?
I'm
Question,
looking at
a
what you're
yes
reading.
vote.
Where are you reading from? It's not on the ballot measure, right? It's not
No,
ballot
this is
measure?
on the card that came out for the yes
got it.
I can
votes.
answer that. Enforcement is what does that. That is not the job of Measure Z. The town is in charge of enforcement because we do have a law. That's the ordinance. But if that ordinance were to go away, the town will not enforce it, and that relies on the neighborhood, and the neighborhood that hired you probably paid a lot of money. And as I said, you know, there are a lot of cases actually in this town where some of the CC&Rs are trying to be enforced. It's very expensive.
Sandy,
We're better
why-
off with our ordinance.
Well, then here's a question. Why should the entire tax base pay for the policing of your specific neighborhood?
I'll take that.
You want that one? Go
All
ahead.
right, Kathy,
Okay.
fire away.
So, when people purchase property, they see what zoning it is. If I was purchasing a property in North Village, like Inner West, you see what the zoning is, and you know going into what it is. Same is true as residential. The truth is, we've got classic, traditional residential zoning. It's zoning that's recognized across the nation as having traditional residential values to it. You know, that's something that you buy going into it, and it's offensive to some of the people to think of change, the fundamentals of the character of that would change, and you have some expectations of service that comes with it. Like, you know, I have the expectation that I'm going to get my roads plowed. That's part of the service expectation you get for owning property and living in a location and whatever. Another expectation of service is that the town will enforce zoning. You know, if I've got somebody who's like raising chickens next to me, it's not in the zoning, I shouldn't have to go out and take them to court. I should be able to call the town and say, it's in violation of zoning.
My wife would not like you as a neighbor.
I know, that's why you guys are in Bishop now. You can do whatever you want.
Yes, I asked one side, so I'll let the other side answer the question as well. A yes vote, this is a bullet point on their card. The voter controls the issue of nightly rentals. Does it, or do nightly rentals continue?
Well, with regards to this particular measure, it doesn't help and it doesn't give the voters control for this reason. What it is prohibition. It would prohibit any change or allowing nightly rentals as administered by the town council. What that means is, when you have a situation where you prohibit something as a blanket, you don't get less of it, you get more of it. In fact, there's such a strong demand for these nightly rental houses. If the town were to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and enforce the codes the way Kathy would like, we're going to put those people out of business. Given the demand for these houses, every time you do that, you put one guy out of business. The demand causes a couple other people to go into the business because the demand doesn't go away even though you put one guy out of business. In point of fact, when you have prohibition, you end up with more of something that you don't like than as opposed to less of it. Marijuana is a good example. We went through 40 or 50 years in this country, spending billions of dollars trying to stamp it out. What we got was more of it. Now in Mammoth Lakes, we have a well-regulated program. We've gotten rid of people growing the stuff illegally, selling it illegally. When you have people doing things that are illegal, they don't care. They violate codes and laws with impunity. They sell marijuana to kids. Now that it's regulated carefully and you have adults in the business, they don't sell to kids. We know what's going on. The police department, I saw our police chief in the back, he can tell you exactly how well it's regulated. So can Ingrid, the sheriff.
So kids aren't getting stoned anymore?
Huh? Don't kids smoke dope anymore? None that I know.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The point being that an intelligent program of regulation can deal with the problems that concern Kathy and Sandy. No one on the No Committee is advocating opening up the town to a horde of nightly rentals or allowing them in neighborhoods with CC&Rs. What we're saying is, let's take this demand and channel it into something that we control, instead of having a whole bunch of illegal rentals that we can't control.
Paul, I see why you were such an effective lawyer, because you could definitely charge. Matthew, go ahead.
I'm going to turn it over to you for the next
Could
question.
I respond
Oh,
to
no
his?
kidding, really? Okay, so Sandy, here's a brief question. What is more horrible? A horrible weekend rental next to your house, or a horrible winter-long rental next to your house?
Winter
Good
long, I
point.
love. Because winter long, you get to know them. They are neighbors. They're not, in other words, for those of you, and there are a lot of young people here with children, you ought to ask them that question. And I think they would know, because they don't want a bunch of every week changing and not knowing what's going to happen with their kids. You know, the neighborhoods are real family areas. They are. I walk through some of them talking to people, and they love their neighborhoods. Even ours that doesn't have, we have a lot of second homeowners. Those second homeowners consider it their home. They are not there as speculators or investors, whatever. They bought in these neighborhoods because, for one reason, because they want to not have, you know, weekly turnovers. They want to have neighbors that they know so that if there's a problem, they go talk to them.
All right,
I mean,
follow-up question for you. Sandy, for some reason, I have a lot of questions for you. So at the council meeting last night, we had the little battle over enforcement. And so town council basically told you that they've doubled the staffing in their enforcement division. And I don't know, A, do you believe them? And B, how much staffing would we actually need in the enforcement division to actually sort of wipe out these illegal rentals?
Well, I will give you a little example. Several years ago, when this was a town council priority, and Matthew, you were on that town council, you set that priority. The priority was TOT enforcement and education, and that was a priority. And we only had a couple of people, and it was in tough straits in those days too, because we had turnovers, and sometimes they were working the front desk, but they brought in more than their salaries, I can tell you that. They brought in over $500,000, I think, in actually a little over a year. Now, okay, what has happened, and I do want to apologize, first of all. I apologized to Shields earlier. I got a little testy last night, and I don't usually. So I want to make a public apology to the council because I was not as respectful as I should have been. But the fact is, yes, we do have. But if you look at what happens in this last year or so, last August, they wouldn't consider that a priority. Okay, and what their priority was, and here are the words, tackle the single-family transient resident decision on a town-wide basis. That's what tells us. Yes, but they did hire staff. We had turnover. They've been training them. And also, as I was probably trying to say last night, maybe not so eloquently, you know, town council have to be leaders. And you've got to encourage your staff. You have a brand new staff. They're getting in there. They were making a great presentation. And just before that, you had somebody saying we can't
literally wipe out the internet? Can you literally enforce this problem into submission?
Right now, with our new ordinance and with the brand new ordinance, there were two people that gave positive input to that to make it as good as could be. I was one of them. Greg Martino was the other. We know that it can be enforced. One thing that's going to happen within the next month, I think on October the 16th, is that every rental is going to, and that's on the web as well, going to have their business license number and their TOT certificate. That's going to make Danny's job really easy. That'll make my job really easy. I went through about 750 of them in a half an hour and could pick out the illegal houses very simply. Boy, this is going to, so it's a good ordinance in that sense. Yes, enforcement can be done, and I can tell you there's a lot of legal money sitting there. When I went through that list of 750, there were a lot of condos, and if you know that, what happens, a condo owner blocks it out and then rents it under the table. That will stop also because that's going to help them bring in a lot of money, and that's legal, sustainable revenue. That's not the illegal stuff. That's legal, sustainable.
David, if you were going to rent your house, how many nights a year do you think you'd rent it?
I'd say 2-3 weeks. I mean, you know, I would love to be able to rent my house during the holidays. We have family in New York. I'd love to be able to go to New York for a week and rent my house to a nice family that's going to take care of my house and spend money in this community. But I live in my house. I mean, I'm not going to rent it. I have no interest in renting it for longer than that, and I have no neighbors who would complain about it because I don't have any neighbors.
And so question, signing a 30-day rental would not work for you if it was over the holidays in particular?
No, and it's a great point because again, to talk about the zone where I live, where there are these big vacant homes that are not ever going to they're not ever going to be rented by working families because they're owned by second homeowners who want to be able to come up over the holidays. So renting it on a short-term basis works for those people. Renting it long-term, they'd rather leave it vacant. And the same is true for me. I live there. I can't rent out the house that I live in long-term. And look, if the town tells me not to rent my house, I won't. But I think it's a shame because we're not collecting tax on my property, and we're saying no to, say the town staff has said they estimate 100 to 150 illegal rentals at any given time during the busy season. Now, if we could actually squash all that business, that's, what is that, 1,000 people, 750 people that we're saying, don't come up this weekend.
Or you send them to the legal areas.
No,
where
but
the
we don't
occupancy
have,
is less than
we have
40%.
9 licensed, I mean, it's in this thing. Call it 11 single-family-like products, and then some cabins up in the Lakes Basin that you'd have to cross-country ski to.
You didn't,
That's not,
you didn't look at the whole list here.
I'm-
There are
Okay,
96
I'm going to
trophy
interject
homes,
you guys.
96 trophy homes.
I'm going to move
40%
on to another question I think that's related, and I'll maybe break this up a little bit. We're talking a little bit about enforcement, and Sandy, I think you mentioned, I was on a committee with you where enforcement was a concern, and we were trying to develop a process by which we could collect legal and illegal incomes. There's a lot of folks that are legal that aren't paying their taxes either. And what I learned in there was a challenge that there's a lot out. There's one house in particular, and this was an extreme example, but this home, we had gone back and found out they'd been rented for years and admitted to owing $300,000 in back TOT. And I wanted to turn to our town manager and ask a couple of enforcement questions, because I think there's a perception out there that that the town isn't doing anything. And Dan, can you give us maybe a couple of minutes on what is being done and, specifically, any restrictions the town has, as well as how to collect tax and whatnot?
Yes, as mentioned, it was a priority of the town council. They gave us that direction quite clearly to get staffed up and get people trained, et cetera. So I think this is the first time that we've actually had 4 full-time people committed to enforcement, a supervisor and 3 revenue specialists. And they do deal with business license, which that's where a lot of this starts, and we also enforce T-bid along with TOT, depending on where those issues are. So they're doing that. Anything we do follows the current ordinance. So it's a 60, 90-day process as we go through, and there's a assessment process, and then ultimately it can be appealed up to the town council and court after that if need be. So there's a whole process we follow through. It's not a matter of, and challenge comes in at sometimes, it's, well, come arrest these people who are illegally renting. Well, the problem there is the homeowner doing it, not the people in the home. So you're balancing that act as well. So you go after the homeowner versus the people who are in the home.